love the game of football. I love this game so much that as a kid, my dad and I would travel from city to city, town to town, here in this great state of Texas to view our local high school team, John Tyler High School Lions. In 1994, this great group of young men who would be my heroes at that time went on to win the 1994 state championship. I remember the moment that I made the decision that football was something that I was going to pursue at all costs. It was in 94 when we were at what was then Texas Stadium playing against Plano East. 22 seconds or so left on the clock. Looks like we were about to lose. Then number 22, Roger Dunn, catches the kickoff, runs it back. We win the game, and we also win an ESPY that year too. I made the decision walking out of the stadium. I told Dad, I got to play for John Tyler. So, as fate would have it, a couple years later, I got a chance to play for John Tyler. I got a chance to be around some great young men. I got a chance to learn some valuable life lessons. But more importantly, that's where my curiosity also began to grow. Because you see, being in Tyler and being in a city with a great legendary head coach in Alan Wilson and great players that would go on to play football at the Division I ranks like Morris Anderson, Darwin Brown, so many people. But the thing that made me the saddest about that situation was the trend that I kept noticing. I noticed that there were guys that would go off to Baylor or Texas A&M or Texas Tech or Kansas State or Florida State and places like that. But during bowl season, they wouldn't be at the game. And I wondered, what's happening? What went on that this guy, this hero, this legend, this guy who a few months ago was celebrating and now is here? Or you come back during spring break and they're still here. Or my father, who worked for Train, said, hey, did you know so-and-so is now working at the plant with me? Or I just trained a young man who was, a star athlete or a star running back, star receiver, who's now working with me. So, as fate would have it, living in a small town, you hear chatter. You hear what people are saying about these young men, about why they're here, why they're not back at school, what our own speculation or assumption about why they didn't do well. He didn't go to class, or he got some girl pregnant, or he was never going to make it at that school anyway. They just brought him there so that he could play football. I never really bought that, but a lot of my peers did. But then, for the few that were out there that were succeeding, there was another word that was getting thrown around. It was called an anomaly. To be an anomaly in this context means that you're successful in the class and outside of the class, which I find ironic because the term is student athlete. So in doing your job, you get called an anomaly because you have to either be good at one or the other, according to some. I never believed that. And not only did I never believe it, I was not going to continue to perpetuate this myth. And so I did the only logical thing that a person in my shoes could do. I decided I'd get a PhD. And so, after I left Abilene Christian in 2009, I got accepted into a PhD program at the University of Texas at Arlington, and I knew I was going to study something with black men in higher education because I got sick and tired of reading study after study or reading news story after news story that was mostly negative, or about how 2/3 or more than 2/3 of all black males who start college never finish, or reading a news story about a student athlete who got in trouble with the law and is no longer in school, or getting kicked out of school for smoking marijuana. That's not the case for everybody. And so as I pursued this study, I started to look at what the research was showing. And so there's a couple of things that I noticed in the research. Number one, as it pertains to black men, there's this thing called socialization. And not just black men, but black people in general. Socialization is basically the principal process by which the codes and sanctions of a social order are imposed on individuals. This is why boys open doors for women. It's a social order that's imposed upon them. This is why you pull out the chair at dinner for your date, which I hope you do. This is also why in the black community specifically, some kids are socialized to pursue sports forsaking other endeavors. Another example of this, my daughter, my oldest child, Alyssa, she's 4. And she's tall for her age. If you saw my daughter, you wouldn't think that she was 4. You'd think she's 6 or 7 because she's this tall already. She's slim. She's got very big calf muscles because she only walks on her tippy toes. It's annoying, trust me. But every time somebody sees my daughter, the first thing they say is what kind of athlete she's going to be, or what kind of dancer she's going to be, or how fast she's going to be able to run. And I'm going, have you ever seen her dance? It's the clumsiest thing in the world. Or my son, who's just 1 year old, and he's huge. He's off the charts in every category. My dad was a big man too. My dad was a running back. I unfortunately didn't inherit the athletic ability, but that's another story for another time. But my son, when people see my son, instantly, oh my gosh, what kind of linebacker is he going to be? And I'm thinking, well, wait a second, what if he wants to program or code or be an English teacher? Socialization impacts blacks more than it does our white brothers and sisters. This is important. But another area that came up was motivation and achievement. It seems obvious that to be successful, you're going to have to be motivated to do it. You're going to have this intrinsic motivation that drives you forward. But some would say that some of those guys who came back home were lacking it. I didn't buy that. I didn't buy the notion that guys that I knew who went off to college and weren't successful didn't lack the motivation and achievement. I didn't buy that. But it's important because the schools that our guys attend can almost always hinder the motivation and achievement of the young men that they bring in. But not only that, it impacts your ability to overcome adversity and the things that you will endure. As a student athlete on a college campus, if you don't have that desire or that fire in you, you can be hindered in that process. But then, of course, why this is important to me, because there's a level of racism that shows up with this, unfortunately. Because, see, you've got, think about this, you've got 18, 19, 20, 21, 22-year-olds, kids, being driven to these predominantly white institutions, coming from a school, like you saw in my photo, we were a predominantly black school. Now imagine going to a place where you were in the majority to where now you are now in the minority for the first time in your life. And you're dealing with people that you've never dealt with before, never had to engage with in a healthy way. Racism rears its ugly head in our classrooms every day. And not only does racism, but the stereotypes follow suit as well. Because see, you have to, as a black male or even as a student athlete, you have to deal with this myth of being a dumb jock. You have to deal with this myth or this stereotype that, oh, the only reason you're here is because you can dribble the basketball, run really fast, or throw a ball down the field. And then you walk into a classroom only to be considered smart enough just to get by, or that the professor's going to cut you some slack because you were on ESPN. And that's not fair. And so I put together a study with the help of my dissertation chair, Dr. Ifoma Ama, and I wanted to conduct an investigation that reflected the voices of black males who were successful in the classroom and outside of the classroom. And the method that lended itself most closely to that was a method called phenomenology. Phenomenology is basically the study of the lived experience. You'll do an interview with someone, and basically what you report are the words that they use. My words don't get put in there. It's the word of the participants, which I'll share with you shortly. But I have to put in a disclaimer here. If you've ever read a comic book or watched TV, you'll notice that these names that you see here are fictitious for obvious reasons, because we have to swear anonymity in order to even get access. But more importantly, I couldn't give you the real name of the school, because if I gave you the name for the school, you figure out who we're talking about. And so I was able to get access to 5 young men who were starters on their respective football teams, but were also academically excelling. And the criteria that I set was very high, because the demands on a student athlete are above the norm. But as you can see by these GPAs and these majors, these are some outstanding young men. Let me tell you what I found. One of the participants said that as a black male that's a student athlete at this predominantly white school, it felt like it's being under a magnifying glass. Everything you do, everything you say gets amplified, gets magnified to the point where it's almost not fair, because you can't be like everyone else. And so, what does it mean to be under the magnifying glass? Number one is to have your intelligence and your very presence questioned all the time. You walk into the class, you're wearing your Letterman jacket, or you happen to have on some sweats, or you're wearing something with your number on it, or you just happen to be 6'5", 315 pounds, and you just happen to be hard to miss. Whether you're an athlete or not, most people in that room are going to think you're an athlete. Or if you're like one of my participants, you want to go to medical school and become a doctor, one of those anomalies that people keep talking about. But then everybody in there is going, wow, you're smart enough to be here? Oh, wow. You're smarter than what we thought you were. You're more than just an athlete. Or, the one I hate most, you're different from everyone else. You're different from the other guys. What do you mean by that? To have your intelligence questioned, it's not like they didn't have to apply through the same rules you had to apply through. Or as a student, hearing things like, he didn't have to submit an application through the deadline like I did, or you're here because of affirmative action, or because of some case or some civil litigation, you're here and somebody else that's more qualified isn't here. We heard these things. I heard these things as a student here from other students. It's hurtful. It's painful. But imagine being an athlete representing this school. These same people who cheer you on Saturdays are the same people that will boo you or be mad at you if you throw the game-losing interception or fumble the ball and cost you a game. I've seen it with my own eyes. Not only that, our student athletes have to do more than the regular student. But when you add that with the racism and the stereotypes that come with being a black male student athlete, and you're 18 or 19 and you're the star quarterback at a school where all of your games are going to be televised, and so will all of your mistakes, it becomes a little bit more difficult, and it's a little bit more understanding why some people don't make it. But we're talking about why people do make it. But our athletes have to do more than the regular student. One of the participants talked about describing, he said, my grandmother may die, but we have a game against a crosstown rival, or a rival from the state this weekend. All the donors are going to be here. All the guys from the NFL are going to come in and be here for this game. It's a big money-making weekend, and I'm the star quarterback. I can't go to my grandmother's funeral because our backup's not going to do well. We may lose the game, may cost us a spot in the playoffs, but my grandmother died. My grandmother's dead. I'm 19 years old. This is the woman that helped me get here. But I can't go home. And then not only can I not go home, I'm not doing so well in my math class, so I got to go to tutoring for that. And if I do decide against my coach and my team's wishes to go home, now I run the risk of losing the scholarship that's paying for me to be here. And then I turn on ESPN and I hear Skip Bayless. Or I hear Stephen A. Smith condemning my actions for wanting to go home. Or I hear a commentator saying I should be grateful. Or, as in the case of some of my participants, turn on the local radio station. And I've spent the majority of my career working in the South, so you can imagine being a black male and hearing some of the Southern dialect, we'll call it, on the radio. He ought to be grateful for the opportunity. He ought to be grateful he has a chance to play here at our great institution. But instead, you got to deal with more than the average student. He's got to overcome those differences, but more importantly, you got to overcome those different racial differences and the stereotypes. Because see, I can't be a scholar athlete because that makes me an anomaly. Can you imagine hearing that? Doing the very thing you set out to do, the thing you've been doing well for a long time, now makes you a freak of nature, this outlier, this thing that's different. School's predominantly white, one participant said. Walk into a classroom and they automatically assume, oh, he's an athlete. I had that happen to me here. Now keep in mind, I did come to ACU. I wanted to play football here. I walked on, but 3 days after my college career started, 3 days later it ended. Because I realized, you know what, I'm not cut out for this. But for the guys that do come into a room that are taking a biology class or taking a graphic design class, they suddenly get this, oh my, he's in here. Or having to overcome the professor that thinks that all athletes just want a handout or that they're not capable of thinking and doing for themselves. That's not fair. And it's no wonder, again, it's no wonder why so many don't make it. But for these guys, they're saying, listen, we've got to build up this level of motivation and achievement. I've got to find a way to excel despite the stereotypes, despite the racism, and they're doing great, all of them. But then you have to understand a lot of these guys aren't from schools where there are a lot of people that look differently than them. So for the first time, they walk into a room like this and they're the only one. Imagine that. You're the only one that looks like you in the room. You don't have a professor that looks like you, but you're the only one. So one of the participants talks about how it's not uncommon to be the only one, but it's also very common to get pointed out and excluded from things, or for students to judge your intelligence or to judge your presence simply because of the letter on your jacket. It's not fair. So you may be wondering to yourself, okay, we've heard a lot of things that your participants said, but what can we do? What can we do as a student? What can I do as a freshman? What can I do as a staff member? What can I do as an employee of this institution or any institution or wherever I work to change this? Number one, you got to stop building programs, initiatives, workshops, webinars, all these different things based on things that didn't work. It amazes me that with all of the dollars we have invested in higher education and all of the money we spend, we still build programs based on things that didn't work. We do research on the students that leave our institutions, and then from that information, we try to build a program. But what I'm proposing is, what if we look at the participants, like in my study, and find out why they're so successful and build our programs from that? Because I think what we would find is that, hey, you know what? Maybe the tutoring program here works. Or maybe the library doesn't have enough books. Maybe we need to invest more in the conversations. What I found that I didn't put in the slides was that having a good relationships with the moms of these guys, not the dads, the moms, is actually a great thing. But we can't build our programs based on deficit perspectives. But secondly, we've got to check our biases. We all have them. Whatever, regardless of whatever gender we are, our race or ethnicity, wherever we come to the table with, we all have a bias. And we have to check them. And we have to recognize that I have this bias. What can I do to think differently about this group of people? I think that where it starts is stop lumping all athletes in one category. And then I think secondly, stop lumping anybody, black, white, Asian, wherever you come to the table. If you stop lumping people in the same group and treat them as individuals, I think that we would see an improvement in the educational outcomes, in our society, and thus we change our world. But also setting high expectations and equipping our black males and our black males that are athletes to meet those expectations. Because when you set low expectations, the stereotype threat theory suggests that when you set low ones, some people are going to meet that low one. But other research suggests when you raise it high enough and you equip the people to meet that expectation, they will meet it every single time. We've got to set high expectations for our student athletes. We've got to set high expectations for ourselves as individuals, that we're not going to be biased, that we're not going to be racist, that we're not going to project stereotypes. Because if we set that expectation and meet it, we're going to do better. But then we've got to provide holistic resources and safe spaces, because the thing that kept coming up with my participants was that they were thrilled at the opportunity to share what it was like to be them. Too many times in research, we talk to people and we don't do anything with it. The schools, we survey the heck out of our students. What do we do with that information? When do the students hear back from the institutions about what we're doing with our surveys? We need to provide a space for our athletes to talk about what's going on in the world. Because guess what? The majority of our football teams and basketball teams consist of African American males. Everybody on that team isn't going to agree what's going on politically. But they can't take to Twitter like the normal student. Because if I'm the star quarterback and I tweet one thing wrong, it gets magnified and it's on SportsCenter, or it's on CNN, or I lose my scholarship. Our players need a space to say, I don't like what's going on politically. If I want to protest, we need to give them the right to do that, but we often don't. And so if we think about this, if we think about the narrative that we perpetuate, or the mindset that we continue to push, if we think about those things in a more realistic and holistic way, then I think that what we'll find is that we can change our schools. And not only can we change our schools, we can change our cities, then we can change our states, then we can change our country, and of course, just like the good old ACU, we can change the world. Thank y'all very much.